Thanks, everybody. I got a couple mic options here. So the original cut of this talk was about 17 or 18 hours long. So trimming down a little bit. I'm also noticed that I'm going to endeavor to try to talk about the last 10 years in some retrospective way to an audience that, as far as I can tell, has probably been alive for the last 10 years and aware of things that were going on in the last 10 years. But I'm going to try to kind of like wrap it all together for you. In the process of doing this, this is a photo of Kurt Vonnegut. He's an author, and he wrote this really interesting book called Timequake. I'm not sure if any of you heard of it, but the principle of Timequake is that there's an event that occurs roughly in 2001 where everybody is sent back in time 10 years, but only like mentally sent back in time. And so they actually have to relive the entire 10 years the exact same way as the whole thing happened, but they're conscious of watching themselves relive that entire 10 years again. And it's a crazy concept. Like, it's like a bizarre kind of hell, like reading the book. But strangely enough, like the endeavor of trying to go back and capture the last 10 years was really like an interesting experience. Right now is the first time I've like tried to do something like this that I can recollect. But like, I'm not sure if you checked recently, but there's a lot of information on the internet. And the other thing as well is that like the databases of emails and everything, like every speaker that I've reached out to, every sponsor I've reached out to in the past 10 years, everybody, you know, all the good news, all the bad news, like going through the process of like reliving these things, you know, not to do any plot spoilers for the book, but like by the end of it, everybody kind of like, you know, in 2001 is able to kind of go back to controlling what they're doing. It's kind of like, you know, a revelation moment. So it kind of feels good to be able to finally get this out of the way. This was also surprisingly influential. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. Hopefully a lot of you are. If you're not, let this be like homework item number 1 for you to do before next year's conference or something like that. This is Mary Meeker, and she annually produces a report that kind of like summarizes everything that's gone on in the digital world, so to speak. And her reports go all the way back to 1995. You can see in the first number of years there was like a USA focus. You can see USA in between 2010 and 2011. But her stuff is phenomenal and highly recommend. Like, you could easily like just, you know, do an hour presentation based off her stuff. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the future, but I just want to make it clear. I won't be going into doing any predictions about the future. I don't have a great knack for that. To be honest, like for context, if we go back to some 2006, 2007 type of stuff, like everybody I knew was on MySpace, and the first time I ever saw Facebook, I was like, yeah, that's not gonna fly. Like everybody I knew, and actually before I got into tech, the only person I knew who was making money in tech was this woman that I knew, and she got paid for customizing, this wasn't the woman, but she got paid for customizing people's MySpace pages. And she was doing pretty good coin, and I understood how valuable it was for people to express themselves on their MySpace pages. And when I caught wind of Facebook, and I'm like, how do you customize this? And they're like, you can. I was just like, no, that's not gonna work out. Additionally, for context, I received my professional training as a Flash developer. Flash was a very popular thing. It's really bizarre to talk about this stuff. It's only like 12 years ago, but like something like that, which is so dated. I do not have a computer science background. I do not have a software engineering background. I kind of like learned that along the way. Kind of touch on that a little bit as well. But also, in case, also have formal training in DVD Studio Pro. So if anybody needs any DVD menus made, hit me up. For those of you unfamiliar with the term DVD, they were these physical plastic discs where we used to store parts of the internet on, and we could like distribute them. Very popular media format, had to be there. Every Christmas we used to buy these like spindles of them that you could see, Boxing Day special, can't be beat. I currently, who does anything for, like, 12 years been working at Intersect, because it's the best place to work at, and we do a lot of great things, solve digital problems for people all over the world, and if you live in North America, there's probably a decent chance you've touched something that we've done, and it was probably great. Okay, let's jump in. So initially, I just want to talk about a convergence, and we'll go back to the beginning. So we got history of human civilization on the Earth planet. We've got the history of tools and technology. We've got the history of communication. We've got the history of electricity and energy. We've got the history of computing. We've got the history of media, and then we've got phones, and we also have PDAs. And this convergence of all these things kind of arriving at these devices, if we take a look back and see the significance of it, it's really interesting, right? Like all these big things kind of converging together into this, mundane thing that is such a common part of our world. But like looking back at it, I couldn't fight the feeling, but like seemed like it was like a bizarrely natural process. Almost to the point where like, if you just scratch these out and it's like, okay, big touch screens, we got memory, we got performance, processors are up to where they need to be. We got cameras, we got GPS and sensors, we've got battery life, that's coming from the sun, we got messaging, we got web browsers, we got media centers, we have cloud services, we have third-party applications, and we've got smartphones. Not to diminish the significance and the brilliance of the organizations that, initially made the current generation of devices that we're using. But when you really kind of add everything up, it's hard to imagine it like going any other way, right? In a lot of ways of thinking about it. And so I guess just quickly to run through, like if we want to trace back when and how exactly these things went down, and I'm saying when and exactly, not that I was witness to these things, but again, as a result of my research. So we got November 5th, 2007. This is from the public world. Obviously, these things were being worked on beforehand. We got Android being unveiled. We've got the Android market announced almost a year afterwards. We've got the first commercial Android device announced September 23rd, 2008. Then we've got October 20th, 2008, the HTC Dream, which was the first commercial Android device, gets released. And then on October 22nd, 2008, the Android market becomes available. Now, the thing that jumped out at me was this. Like, imagine having an Android device for like, what would you do those 2 days, like, without access to the Android market? Like, did they just like play calculator or like what? Like what did they do? But who knows? Maybe just watch movies. So this is the butte that emerged. Like look at the curves and the craftsmanship. HTC still makes phones. Believe it or not. But so we got this thing, and so what's the landscape? So the dropping of this was significant, right? Google's cool. Gmail has swept in for a few years at that point in time. The idea of open source, like, you can't dismiss the significance of that, right? Like, this is the theme, like one of the central themes with Android dropping. Like, what's the point? Why is it not just another phone, right? So like, the iPhone has been around for a little bit by this point in time, but we got the open source. And also, just so everybody's aware, like, there was skepticism when this dropped, right? It's like, the question was, is Android going to make it, right? There just wasn't a lot of belief, and you can see them kind of hedging their bets, right? Like, Apple went full tilt on the touchscreen. The Android world, that was a risky maneuver, right? Everybody's accustomed to the physical keyboard, and Android's like, yeah, we think everybody's going to go with the big screen, but like, we're still going to provide the keyboard. The whole idea of openness is really, if we talk about like, why does this conference even exist, right? Like, that openness, opening the platform, and actually, strangely enough, almost going back to the MySpace discussion, you could just customize the whole thing, right? Like, you can root the phone, you can customize the launcher, you could do things that you can't do on any other type of device. The other like funny thing in retrospect, I remember the first Android device I had was at some sort of family event or something, and my cousin's friend looks at my phone, he's like, oh, was that like the knockoff BlackBerry? I'm just like, okay, man, like, it's just like weird hearing like, or considering those types of things after the fact. Another interesting thing, going back and digging into it and like, if you want to take a look at why there was skepticism about it. So Android was the result of this thing called the Open Handset Alliance. And obviously, like, Google really kind of has taken the reins of Android over time. But there's like a whole orchestra of organizations that are involved in this Open Handset Alliance, right? It goes all the way from carriers to device makers to people making the processors, like all those pieces, software companies, and everything. And one of the other pieces of skepticism was like, could Google even like hold this group of people together or start this group of organizations together? Like, it was a lofty endeavor, especially when you compare it to other systems like, and again, not just Apple, but like, anybody else making phones, because again, at this point in time, like, nobody's necessarily convinced that this is gonna fly. The other strange thing is that, like, so the website has not been updated. The Open Handset Alliance website has not been updated since 2011. As far as I know, it still exists. Like, people were added, but if you even go check out, some of their Wikipedia entries, it's kind of like they have the dates of when new organizations joined the alliance, and then it stops. It's like unknown date, and then there's a list of like other companies. So not really sure what's going on there, but it still seems to be in business. Other significant thing, and again, speaking of the enthusiasm about the community, the logo and the branding was brilliant, right? And when we talk about like open source things, like, this is like officially Creative Commons licensed, right? Like, it's doing something that nobody else really did in that space, at least, to my knowledge, to any degree. They were just like, yup, Android's a thing, it's a big thing, it's an important thing, do what you want with the branding. Which in retrospect, like, it's just like everybody, another one of those things that got everybody excited, right? And again, going back to, the types of things that would make this open for people to jump in and participate and get working. And if you think of the last decade, the whole kind of concept of the significance of the hacker mentality and everything, they were just like, yeah, here's the device, it's very capable, do what you want with it. And that really opened the door to a lot of enthusiasm. So those are the tech pieces going on in the background. Just to jump in a little bit to community things. And from a community aspect, really, a lot of it's the same as now, minus, there's not much meetups abundance. Meetup.com, not a thing, right? Like, there's a few bulletin boards, or at least I can talk about my experience within the Toronto area at the time. There's a few bulletin boards. There's not really conferences, right? There's one, actually, even for this conference, there's one main inspiration that I'll talk about in a bit. There's no boot camps. There's no incubators. There's no startups, really. There are small businesses, but there's like this like startup mentality. Now, again, my entry point is in the 2007, so like maybe, somebody from 95, 96 that was part of the .com area might be like, Mark, you're stupid, like that's not factual. But here, like, I mean, you met other people. I don't even know if they were entrepreneurs, right? Like, these are people that are just running small businesses. And there's no hackathons either, which is kind of nuts, because like these are like pervasive things within, like, I mean, there's probably, like, we could leave right now and find a hackathon and probably a boot camp to sign up for and do that there. The other big thing that really, in my mind, can't be understated, not something that I participate too much these days anymore. It's kind of hard to kind of corral what's going on in that neighborhood, but really can't dismiss the importance of Twitter at that time in terms of being a community stimulus. To be honest, like, the roots of all the relationships that led to this event, if you trace the lineage back, really come from Twitter. And the funny thing, I guess, about it is that if you talk about like the small amount of meetups that were around, there was like literally like a Twitter meetup. So it's a meetup just for people that use Twitter, right? That's the type of meetups and things that we had going on at the time. And also, like, tech events, again, another fairly mundane thing in the world that we're living right now. These things don't exist in the same realm that we're talking about. To the point where, especially like events, so, for context, shortly, I guess, before getting rolling with androidTO, we were running, still the previous incarnation of Intersect, a company called bNotions, just getting going, like maybe 2 years into its infancy. We start running workshops out of our office. Why? Because people helped us out when we were getting going. We were doing a lot of stuff with open source software, and so the whole idea of like stimulating community was right up our alley. We had the inclination, looking forward to meeting new people. We start running workshops. Well, the idea of a free tech workshop to go to, like it doesn't jive, right? This is just like not a thing. Like, you know, the question wouldn't be like, how do I sign up or like blah, blah, blah. The question was why? Why would you do that? Right? Like, why would you run a free tech event? Which was kind of funny. To be honest, like some of the initial free events that we'd run or were a part of, I'm not sure if anybody's ever been to a situation where they accidentally got tricked into going to like one of those pyramid marketing scam things. The first free workshop I ever recall running, I remember being in the room and like about 45 minutes in, there's just like this weird tension because everybody's looking at me and they're waiting for the sales pitch. They're like, okay, all right, we're gonna learn websites, and what are you gonna charge us for? How are you gonna get us? And like finally, like after like 2 hours, everybody's like starts to put their guard down a little bit, right? So there's just like, we're just getting used to this kind of thing, right? It's just not a big part of what we're doing. So getting into it, so like how does this occur? So there is some free events going on right now. I wouldn't say like we invented them or anything. There was an event called PodCamp, a North America thing. There was a Toronto chapter of it. And me and my business partner, Al Karim, we'd been running B Notions. We meet this guy, Pauline. So Al Karim and I, like, both heavily into open source things. We meet Pauline at this event. We go out for lunch together, and this guy's just like off the wall about Android. And we love it too. This guy's just like a bubble of like Android energy. He's talking about rooting devices, doing this, testing it out on different SIM cards, and just like, I think we're at this conference, or we're at this event, and all of a sudden, over the course of the lunch discussion, the logical thing was we should do a conference. And then all of a sudden, the next thing we know, like everything's in gear. We're announcing dates. We're just doing whatever. And again, like, why could we do it? Well, we didn't have to phone anybody and ask for permission. Can we use the licensing to use the branding and call it an Android conference? No, because they were like, yeah, just go ahead and do it. And so in those initial phases, there's really one organization, and again, this is my experience with it, but like to my knowledge, there was one significant annual tech conference that occurred in the city of Toronto. It was called FITC. It's still active, which I find tremendously impressive. But they were going, and you know, for me at that point in time, getting into the industry, it was a significant event, right? We learned so much, met so many people. It was awesome, and so in our minds, like, you know, making this first conference, like, FITC is like the thing that we're trying to do. Very polished, just tremendous execution, very much like what the incredible team is doing right now with this event. And so, you know, we go at it. We get our branding. I'm still repping the original androidTO T-shirt from year one. This is the designer that put it together, Aaron Alfred. And also one thing to keep in mind as well. Don't know why, but we were just hung up on free events. So the first androidTO was like entirely free to attend. And I don't know why we endeavored to go that way, but like, hey, it was just like the thing that we were compelled to do. But yeah, so like a free, ambitious conference was the mandate. So obviously you end up needing to be a little bit picky. So it's not at Mars, but it's at the Polish Combatants Hall, somewhere near U of T. I think it was on Beverly Street somewhere. And you know, it was really held together with like duct tape and love. This is a shot from the event. That's like some weird wire draped from the far back of the ceiling down the middle of the audience, just draped there, leading to a projector, which is pretty sweet. This is a look at the stage in year one. This was the kind of thing that was on everybody's mind. Like, so customization of the Android device was just a huge thing. I would say like the two prevailing themes is like, how do I customize this? How do I make screensavers? How do I, you know, do this? And like, what's the global market opportunity is kind of like, you know, the prevailing sentiments in everybody's mind. A couple things, accidents that we made, scrambling hard to get sponsorships. We had two hot leads for like lead sponsors, like the exclusive lead sponsor thing. But two different people are pursuing the two different companies, and don't they end up landing both of them on the same day. So we accidentally booked 2 headline sponsors, both in the same industry. And then we have to like somehow tell them that we accidentally booked like their main competitor as the headlining sponsor. And then we have to do this negotiating so that one of them gets like first dibs at exhibit booth, the other one gets first dibs at like headlining sponsors next year. Just a conference mess. The other thing that was really charming about this is that once we got the conference all set up and we went to start doing the speaking, somehow our audio system was picking up the frequency of a radio station. So every talk throughout the course of the day had this like faint classical music playing in the background. We were still trying to run our business, and so in the middle of the day, we were like probably behind the stage trying to like code stuff because we couldn't really take a day away from what we were trying to do. This was a hot exhibit at year 1, Show Me Your Droid, and we had our videographer there, and the whole premise behind Show Me Your Droid was just to have interview people about their phone and make a montage of everybody's favorite thing about their Android phone. Those cookies. So who's going to MC the event? Well, we need to hire a professional MC. All right, cool. Let's go do it. All right. So what do we got? Well, cheapest one we could find, $1,000. Poof. We don't got that. All right, who's going to MC it? Mark, why don't you MC it? I'm not standing in front of 300 people talking at an event. I'm talking at the event. All of a sudden, I'm right there and still got my lucky Android hat 10 years later. Still fits. So everything's awesome, and strangely enough, like flipping through the photos, not that I enjoy having slides of myself, but this is me at the after party being like, why the hell would we do that? So we're off and running, and you know, after 2010, we're kind of getting into it, and really, like, what's unfolding is it's the gold rush, right? So, like, everybody starts to flock to the table because slowly, as a civilization, we're understanding the opportunity, right? We have, you know, the question about whether Android's going to make it. I mean, even the same thing was there for iPhone at the time. There's no question anymore, right? We're understanding how it's going. There's really low barrier to entry. Right? Basically, you have a laptop, you're good to go, right? You have a computer, you can start capitalizing on the opportunities that are becoming available, and there's lots of opportunities becoming available. A lot of lucrative attention coming to the situation. The other thing that I want to make mention as well, in terms of like things that I'm not sure about, the prevalence, so we're talking about 2 things emerging at the same time. We're talking about these very powerful, to call them phones really dismisses the situation, right? Like, these are capable mobile computers, right, that we're carrying around. Phone's the entry point because we loved our phones. But we also have the social media phenomenon sweeping in. And if you were to ask me whether one exists without the other, or whether one thrives without the other, I don't really know the answer to that. Right? Like it's hard to envision the current ecosystem of phones that we're describing without the social network pieces behind it. And it's also hard to envision the social network pieces having the grapple on the world that they have without the phones, right? So, you know, which one is responsible for the other? Who knows? They both also rely on a lot of the same systems. The other big piece, and again, this is probably my spin on the situation, but maybe it's indicative of just, you know, some of the mind state, is that there is a very understated piece of software that, along with a lot of the social media outlets, I think kind of gets like a little bit like lost under the radar. Maybe not for the significance of this piece of software, but for the overall effect that it had on industry and the approach that we're taking to things. And this significant piece of software is Angry Birds. The thing about Angry Birds was that it came out and it was very popular. People really loved this game, and it really, you know, obviously, when the phones came out and developers had access to them, there were other games, but this seemed to be the one that had crossover appeal, where I wouldn't be surprised if somebody was like, wanted a smartphone specifically in order to be able to play Angry Birds, right? So this is a very significant game, top of charts for a significant period of time. One of the other things that I want to draw attention to is that the financial success of this game, at least in the circles that I was a part of, or at least even reading the charts, it again, the lucrative nature of this game drew a lot of attention. The other thing that it had in common with the social networks is that nobody had heard of the company that made this game, Reale, and then all of a sudden, everybody had heard about it. And so it seemed like an overnight success. Very similar in a lot of ways to the way a lot of the social networks seemed like an overnight success. And all of a sudden, you start getting into this headspace where everybody's seeing these things that they hadn't heard of one day that are wildly popular the next. And they're like, yo, I could do that in a weekend, right? But the thing is that behind these things, right? Like I think we're all familiar enough with Facebook right now. Like Facebook did not start in 2007, 2009. It goes back to like 2003. Same thing with Reale as a company, right? Like a company that is able to exist 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, odds are they start understanding what it means to run their business. They probably get good at their craft. We have another example here of a very polished game, a very intelligent game, taking advantage of an emerging platform, and it's a financial success, but it looks like it came out of nowhere. So who does this bring to the table? This brings just like any of the speculators, right? Again, going back to this gold rush mentality. Everybody's flocking because they're seeing money being made. Everybody wants to do a startup. Everybody wants to do a social network. Everybody wants to make apps. Geolocation is huge. People are like quasi-mayors of various locations because they're checking in on this and that, and it's hot. Like, I was the mayor yesterday, you're the mayor today, blah, 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 blah. It was like really interesting point in time, right? A lot of people were involved with these kind of things. The other thing is that now we're getting into the place where like the significance of these things, anybody who had an existing product on web, like the enterprise is kind of like, oh, what's going on over here? And we start getting interest from the enterprise space as well, which really like is clearly one of the significant things that's happened, at least in the last half dozen years. So branching from that, so obviously we've got the two big platforms, and in a scenario like that, of course, both platforms, like, you have to pick one or you have to pick the other, depending on what part of the world you're in. Maybe you're going to choose one or maybe you're going to choose the other. Or maybe it's like really tempting to choose both. Anybody coming from a web background understands like some of those tough decisions, right? Like, supporting multiple browsers was a very expensive proposition. It's become better now, but obviously you get to the point where you got this reality, the dream, that then like this is like the number of times I've had the discussion about this phenomenon of what the right way to build things is. Like, it's just like, it's a dominant discussion as it goes right now. Still, probably a TBD. Go forward another couple years. All of a sudden, this comes out of nowhere. Retroactively, though, was it a surprise? Majority of US consumers still download 0 apps per month. This is an article from 2017, right? Like, everybody came to the table because of this like apparent, promise of success. But we end up with this reality. The app gold rush is over. Quote, if the App Store presented developers with a potential river of revenue when it launched 6 years ago, it's little more than a trickle today. Profits are squeezed as the App Store becomes more industrialized. The rush to it, there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces of software that got made. And it's really interesting. Like, one of the big attention came from independent developers and the coolness factor, but the retention and the cost to like keep and maintain a piece of software, we're starting to be hit with some harsh realities. And it ends up having some really interesting effects. Like only in the past 10 years we end up in this hype cycle, right? And so this is, I guess here's one of the funny things. Because when these products came out and they kind of came out of nowhere, there was no reason to doubt when these same companies announced a new product, right? They just dropped these incredible phones that everybody looked forward to, but now we're in this scenario where just like, if they drop it, it must be great. So this is kind of like the depressing part of this. And to be clear, some of the things that I included in this segment of the show, they probably still thrive in some realm, but I think what I'm speaking to mostly here is consumer excitement, right? Like everyday kind of excitement, buzzing in the common consciousness. R.I.P. Loved you dearly. For me personally, one of the other damaging things about this was, I found it to be a useful tool, and I invested a lot of time and energy into certain like educational communities that I was involved with Google+. What's going on with this? Right? I love it. I love the platform, but like, my phone my watch crashes, right? It hurts. Anybody remember this? Kickstarter. Oh yeah, the Android console. Such a cool idea. Rest in peace. Anybody recognize this beauty? I love this thing. All right? For those of you not familiar, this is the Nexus Q. This is a home media player. You set it up at home, connect it to your Wi-Fi. It's NFC enabled, so you can just like stroll home, tap it with your phone, and all of a sudden it'll play your music. I don't even know if this like ended up shipping commercially, right? But it was just this like orb, and it was good looking. But like obviously we have Google Home and everything now, so like the lineage of that progressed. But I felt kind of like died an early death. Obviously, like not a Google thing. I'm not restricting this just a Google thing, but like, man, like the buzz around 3D printers. Holy moly! Obviously, 3D printers are still a thing, but again, like the consumer aspect, people backed Kickstarters because they wanted a 3D printer in their home because they thought of the possibility. Nice try. I remember going to a Google Buzz meetup organized by Google, and there was 10 people there, and 6 of them were from Google. But funny enough, it was in 2010 while we were getting the first version of the conference going, and they loved the fact that we were doing it, and they actually like ended up like having us go down to San Francisco and meet some of the Android team because they were like, yo, these people are throwing an Android conference in Toronto. They're like, wow, really? That's incredible. So, hey, again, community benefits. This one is more daggers for me. I love this UI so much. Died too early. Oh, Android things. Where did you go? Where did you go? Representing Canada. The stoic BlackBerry playbook. The PlayStation phone. Seriously, like the PSP was a great console, so the idea of a PlayStation phone was hell yes, and somehow they didn't do it, right? Like people were waiting. I still don't get it. Like I still can't piece that one together. Project Tango, daydream, just a daydream. It's us in 2009. It's us in 2019. So so it's hard, right? Like, so what you have in those situations is like, I guess like an erosion of trust, right? So, and again, like there's no malice. It's like obviously like nobody did it on purpose, but what you have is scenarios where you have abandoned communities, you have developers going in and investing time into ecosystems, right? Like if they're, like I developed stuff for Windows Phone. Right? Like, what do I do with that now, aside from adding it to, like, a programming experience that I had, right? Like, if you talk to anybody that's been in any way any kind of evangelist for Google's IoT stuff, like, how excited are they going to be if they come out with another IoT kit, right? It's like, yeah, okay, whatever, right? And without that developer community support, like, it's really, really hard to do. And I guess like the funny thing is that like, going back to what I said at the beginning, like the conversation about the brilliance and incredible nature of Android's openness is not talked about anymore, right? Like it's still at its heart the same platform, but it's not there. So this slide is intentionally serious because the other thing that has unfolded over time is that the nature of the discussion, we have a bit of a rift, right? We have a rift between the things that we're both alluring to consumers as well as developers. And you know, a lot of the talk now is about build processes, pipelines, doing things cheaper, doing things faster, testing, so on and so forth. And it's all valid, right? These are all very important things. I don't want to diminish the importance of that, but the conversation has definitely shifted. This look of a curve on a chart is used in a lot of scenarios. And in this scenario, I'm going to talk about it as the building optimized software chart, where on the y-axis we have the state of the software, on the x-axis we have time, and we've got what I call the does it work line, and at the top we'll call it the is it optimized line. And you know, a lot of attention, developer attention is all up in this area, right? A lot of the talks and discussions are, you know, how do we make this better, 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 faster, 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 better, 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 faster, 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 and like the phenomenon of like, can I get a widget on the home screen? Like nobody really, like that discussion's not happening these days, right? Like nobody really cares about that anymore. And a lot, I guess like one of the interesting things is that, you know, back into a lot of the original principles. And I guess like one of the things going back to the beginning, like talking, like not coming from a comp sci background, having to kind of jump in at some point in my career in the last 5-6 years, like the threads of discussion that are unresolved currently, this is the first object-oriented programming language in a lot of ways. It blew my mind. If you go online and do a search for is object-oriented programming good, it's a flame war. Like it's a big battle. And the only thing I can say is that like computer programming is emphatically a challenging human activity. And it really feels like right now where we're at the beautiful grind of building standards compliant software. One of the tones of discussion that I feel is unfortunate is that or things that I wouldn't mind seeing kind of addressed. This is just a picture of somebody doing something like sinister to somebody. The thing is a lot of times, so we have standards and we talk about them, security, accessibility, inclusiveness, and these types of things. And we struggle as an industry to get things to where they need to be, but I've still yet to really meet a malicious person in my day-to-day experience, which causes me to question, how is there still that disconnect? I don't know the answer to that. It might have to be that, like, you know, maybe more pressure needs to be applied to the people making the standards or something like that, but it's an interesting dilemma, right? Like if everybody's equipped with the time and the information that they need to do, you know, what is considered the good job, you know, I have confidence that they will. And I guess just one kind of note on the community aspect. One of the other things that has really been challenging to erode community and openness, and you know, this is kind of like the arch nemesis that we, you know, deal with in the community, is that with all the openness, you know, what started coming to the table is like people that you kind of, unfortunately, kind of don't really want to be around, right? And it really, you know, like Free Beer Guy is the mythical villain of meetups in Toronto, just this like guy that strolls in and checks to see if there's free beer, and if there isn't, he leaves, and if there is, like, he just goes for the beer. I guess in trying to kind of wrap together one thing to put on the radar, so our relationship with screens and our relationship with consuming media, it's an interesting trend. Maybe you can observe the pattern. In the early 1900s, as a group of people to consume media, we gathered together in a place where there was a screen, right? So we would get together and we would watch the media on the screens. In the 1930s to 1950s, we took the screens, we started bringing the screens into the home. In the 1980s, 1990s, we started carrying the screens around with us. In the past decade, we started wearing the screens. And now we're trying to like get inside the screens. And I think I start to understand a little bit more what Tron was about. And one of the things I really feel when I try to piece back together, and apologies if everybody hates this, but one of the things that really doesn't add up to me is why this disappeared, because, it really doesn't make sense. Like, clearly, this is the direction in some regard that we're heading in. Clearly, it's really strange that the best augmented reality experience available right now for us in the commonplace was the one that was available like 10 years ago, where you can hold your phone up to the night sky and understand what constellations you're looking at. Like, that's 10 years old, right? There's nothing better than that right now from an AR perspective. So I guess, like, in closing, this is a quote from a mathematician and philosopher. It's the business of the future to be dangerous, and it is. In Mary Meeker's most recent presentation or slide deck that she put together for 2019, she had a few notes of similar effect. Regardless of what participants say, they exhibit a preference for negative news content. And additionally, from the early 1900s, the person running the New York Times was looking at the same thing. A discussion about the social impact of media that we consume would not be complete without a shout out to Marshall McLuhan. But one of the things about Marshall is that during his time, he was kind of like notoriously known to be kind of a little bit hard to wrap your head around. Right now, in the last 10 years, we've had the experience of us creating a tool. So we are shaped by our environment. We created a tool becomes a part of our environment, and now our environment changes how we react. It's really unfortunate that it's an acronym, and one of the dangerous parts of acronym is that FOMO, the F stands for fear, and we toss it around like it's nothing, but again, like, these aren't, great sentiments that we want around. A lot of talks about this, like, you could go on for a couple of hours just on this topic, how hard it is to switch this off, what happens when you do. Aside from that, as we head into the next decade, a lot of software still needs to be built. Be vigilant of this curve. I'm going a slight bit into OT. Apologies for that. Just want to do a quick check to see where I'm at. I think maybe what we'll do. So one of the things that I find is a really great attribute right now, and one of the things that provides a lot of optimism is the attention for quality of life, the fact that there's a lot of organizations and a lot of talks just around stuff like improving the developer experience, having that kind of like seep more into the consciousness, I think is a really beautiful thing. And I think I'll kind of close my piece with this reference. So there's this principle I came across somewhere called the principle of something being more fun than you really wanted. And the analogy that was made for that was, maybe you had this experience yourself. I know I did. At the amusement park, they got this ride called like the Gravitron. And so the scene is, you just went and had a whole bunch of food from the concessions, a whole bunch of cotton candy, and you're like, I wanna go on that ride. And you jump in, and so what this thing does, it just like spins. And it's got like, the gravity kind of pushes you back. So, you end up throwing up, right? Because like you're spinning and you're not prepared for it. And it's fun, but then it's like, okay, this fun's a little bit too much. It's more fun than you really wanted. And the thing is, we're all here. The ride's been fun. We're in this weird situation now, but it's still there. Like, I mean, the option, we're still participating in it. And I mean, I guess, here we are, whether we like it or not. Like, this is the scenario that we're in. And so going into the next decade, I think, taking a step back, taking a holistic look at things, I hope would be a thing that we all can have the presence of mind to step back and do. And I guess related to that, before I leave, just wanted to give a few general shout-outs. I guess, first of all, to all the pillars in any form of community, all the meetup organizers. A lot of times it's a lonely journey when nobody shows up, but the attendance list said 150 people. To, people that have, in their spare time, earnestly worked to put together great content and been met with non-constructive criticism. Anybody who's had to deal with free beer guy or, like anything like that. And little things like even in the online space, right? Anybody who's taken the time to delete an outdated tutorial on the web, like all these little things that can provide obstacles to developers trying to do the wonderful things that they do. And I think on that note, I'll wrap there. I just want to say a huge thanks to Jeff. It's been a blast trying to bring Toronto and bring all these people to Toronto over the years, and I think you and the team have done a beautiful job of keeping the tradition going. So thank you, and thank you everybody.